G'day and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to use my clinical experience to show you how to fix rounded shoulders. And we're going to do that with the use of 3 different exercises. And each of these exercises I think are highly useful and a piece of the puzzle to help you conquer those rounded shoulders, particularly for anyone out there who's dealing with any form of shoulder pain at the moment, whether it was an acute accident or something that's come on insidiously or randomly. Rounded shoulders can have a really strong impact, or at least a strong say in the cause of that dysfunction, the persistence of that dysfunction, and why that dysfunction isn't going away or staying away long term, particularly if it keeps reoccurring. So in this video, I want to go through 3 helpful ways to hopefully rectify that. And then there'll be a bonus 4th piece of information that I think is really important to tie all this in together that we'll go through towards the end of the video. So please hang around for that if you're interested. Before we get to all that, obviously, please consider leaving a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Hopefully these videos are really helpful for you guys. And then obviously, please leave a super thanks donation if you found this genuinely helpful, genuinely insightful and impactful to your shoulders and your shoulder pain. Again, before we get into this video, let me know in the comments down below. Are you someone who is dealing with shoulder pain at the moment and you're trying to rectify those rounded shoulders to hopefully help improve your shoulder pain? Or are you just someone who wants your shoulders to look and function better? I'm always interested to know. It really helps me make the content in these videos more specific to you. So let me know down in the comments as well. That'd be fantastic. So getting into this, obviously, when we're talking about rounded shoulders, we're obviously talking about an improper postural position or imperfect anatomical shapes that we need to change so that the function of those shoulders get better. And the first thing I think is really important to talk about is, in the industry, we tend to focus a lot on chest tightness. The idea being that if your chest muscles are tight, obviously they're going to pull your shoulders forward and round those shoulders forward. Now, I'm going to wrap up the first and the second exercises in the same conversation because they're very closely related. Basically, we're going to go through a chest stretch and we're going to try and rectify the cause of that chest muscle tightness. Now, what I think is really important here is that we did an old video on this a while ago. I'll link it up here. But the important thing that I think a lot of people don't realize, including a lot of people in my field, is that chest muscle tightness is caused by something. It's not caused by, the chest muscle tightness doesn't spontaneously occur and then cause the shoulders to round. In my experience, chest muscle tightness, pec muscle tightness, is a direct consequence of upper back stiffness. Now that may sound strange because the chest muscles are at the front, your upper back is obviously around the back, but what we tend to find is when we start to adopt these rounded shapes, so when we talk about your postural habits and losing a good position, the weight of the arm, the tension created by dumping those shoulders forwards, creates all this extra tension in the upper back. And those upper back joints, so your thoracic spinal joints, and your rib cage joints get stiff and tight because that's what they're asked to do based on the increased pressure and tension in those areas. And the interesting thing about the back is that the upper back and the back of that rib cage physically connects to the front. So obviously it goes without saying, your rib cage is essentially a barrel that runs from the back all the way around to the front. So any dysfunction at the back is going to permeate through to the front regardless. And those chest muscles, your pec muscles, whether it's the pec minor or the pec major muscle, they anchor onto the front of that rib cage. So if there's joint restriction, joint dysfunction at the back, anything associated with that can be included in the conversation. And what I'm finding clinically is if you're someone who wants to get rid of chest muscle tightness for any reason, let alone rounded shoulders, you need to free up the stiff joints at the back to give that a chance to free up so that when you do some chest muscle stretches, which we're going to go through as part 1, and we're going to mobilize the back as part 2 to this, if you're just stretching your chest muscles, they are most likely going to re-tighten again the next day or very soon afterwards, unless you're having a very adult conversation surrounding why those chest muscles are tight in the first place. And for what I'm personally finding clinically, by mobilizing the joint stiffness at the back, that chest muscle tightness doesn't come back again once you start to stretch it. So I find that that's a key piece of the puzzle that's often overlooked, is that if you're not freeing up the back, it's impossible for those chest muscles to free up long term. So with that being said, the first stretch that we want to go through is if you can find a wall or a door frame or a post, doesn't matter what it is, depending on where you feel the tightness and depending on how your shoulder feels, if you have some discomfort, you might find a straight 90-degree position is beneficial for you. Some people might find that by reaching up higher, that might grant you a better access to your chest muscle tightness without annoying your shoulder. And all this basically is by holding onto something or digging into the wall here in a good posture, so shoulders back first. We can twist your trunk away, and as you twist away, you should start to tension up those chest muscles in that area. Again, play around with which position you feel gives you the best access to your chest muscle tightness. It'll be very specific to you. But the key point here is another thing that gets missed a lot is that we're moving beyond static stretching. Static stretching doesn't make significant change, or at least it doesn't make the change that we've expected it to and hoped it has over a number of years. Holding a position doesn't respect the neuromuscular junctions, the brain and the nervous system's involvement in muscular tightness. So what we need to do here is instead of just getting into a position and holding it, we actually need to activate that tightness in this position. So once you've found a spot that feels tight, so for me, I can feel a little bit of tightness through the chest here. What I want to do is I want to tense this muscle. I want to tense my chest muscle. I can do that by pushing back into the surface that I'm on to use this muscle to do that. Hold that for about 10 seconds. Once I've done that, I then relax that. And what you should find immediately, you should be able to go a little bit further into the stretch than what you could before, and you should see some immediate change. So obviously we want to keep doing this. So finding some tightness, tensing up that tightness for 10 seconds, relaxing for a little bit without losing your position, going further, tensing for 10 seconds, stop tensing, go further until you feel like you stop making change. And what you should instantly feel is there's a significant difference in how mobile and how free and how loose that pec muscle feels. You'll never get the same results by just holding that position. You've got to get active. It gets your brain and nervous system involved in the conversation. That maximal tensing is followed by a maximal relaxation, and that tissue starts to give and you can go further and further. So point one, or exercise one in this video, is to make sure that you can sufficiently stretch and mobilize those chest muscles to allow your shoulders to come back better. Now, as I said before, the crucial part about that is you're going to have to forever keep stretching those chest muscles until we take a ball to your upper back and free up some of that restriction. So again, if you've been a fan of the channel, you'll know what we're going to do here. But the goal is we want to place the ball just in between your spine and your shoulder blade. We want to go hunting for where your best position is or where the best spot feel is. Now again, the exercise here isn't rolling around. Another common mistake a lot of people make is that we use the ball to roll on tissue, but because we're trying to affect the motion at the spinal level, the thoracic joints and the costovertebral joints, those rib joints, they're very specific joints. So if we're rolling over the top, we're never getting any sort of downward pressure through those joints to create some more mobility. Instead, once you've found a spot that feels a little bit tight and restricted, so I found a little one here, I want to let the ball press into that spot, allow that tissue to free up. Now, if this isn't enough for you, we want to stay here for 30 seconds or a minute, whatever you feel comfortable with. You can use your arm and lift your arm up above your head, provided that you can tolerate this if you have shoulder pain. In a perfect world, you should be able to get your arm to touch the surface that you're lying on. But a lot of people, because this is restricted, it will block your arm or your shoulder from expressing full range of motion. But what you should hopefully find is once you've found a spot that feels restricted and you come up to a point, so for me, this feels like a comfortable end range at the moment. I'm a little bit stiff today. But what you should find is the more you do this, the faster you should see, or the more you should see that arm move to the point where you can get that range of motion back. Now, we're not trying to cheat by lifting up our chest. We're keeping everything still. So again, I'll find another spot. This spot's a little bit restricted for me. I feel like that restriction kicks in here, but then the more I mobilize in and out of that restricted range, it starts to give and starts to free up. Now, that's really, really important because what we're doing is we're mobilizing the joints at a specific level. And then what you should find is that as those muscle fibers attach from your chest, from your arm to your chest wall onto that rib cage, as you start to mobilize those stiff rib joints at the back, then you should feel like it doesn't have the need to remain tight. So it's really, really important. So those two things are interchangeable. Essentially, they're part of the same conversation. You should never be doing chest muscle stretching without doing some upper back mobilization, because it's not going to get you the results that you need. You can do this mobilization without the chest stretching, but obviously by stretching the chest muscles, you're going to get yourself there a lot faster. So if you're trying to get yourself out of that rounded shoulder position, we need to de-stiffen the back, mobilize the front to allow those shoulders to come back. And the other interesting thing is, if you stiff at the back here, it often acts as a little bit of a block or a handbrake to your shoulder blade successfully rolling back or sort of retracting back across your upper back. So we want to basically take away those restrictions at the front and at the back to allow your shoulders to get back into a better position. Now, when we're talking about rejigging any sort of postural habits, we also need to have a conversation about strength and muscle activation. So you can do this a number of ways, but the third exercise we want to go through is a rowing exercise. I'm going to use the TheraBand. You can do bent over rows with a weight. You can do cable rows. You can even grab underneath a table and practice doing some rows that way. Doesn't matter how you do it. The key thing is your technique and fatigue. So what we want to do, we're going to hook this around a post. And like any position, like any exercise, we need to value good posture. So again, you have to start in a good position, shoulders comfortably back as far as you feel comfortable, head up nice and tall. We're not sort of poking down, we're not poking that chin out. Nice, comfortable position. And how I like to do these rows is, particularly if you're coming from a rounded shoulder position, a great place to start with this is not to bring your hands all the way back to your belly. Is what this can do basically is, if you try and finish the exercise by bringing your hands back to your side almost, if you don't have the mobility at the back or at the front of your chest, it can be very easy for you to dump into an anteriorly tilted position and really compromise some of those shoulder tissues. What we want to make sure that you're doing is, if you can bring it back so that your elbows stop at your side, so essentially you're in a good posture here, it's then a lot easier to roll those shoulder blades back around your back, strengthening the muscles in that area. So again, enough tension. We don't necessarily, and look, you can get to this position if you can maintain a great shoulder posture, but if you find that getting here compromises your shoulder and you dump forwards, then just stop at about elbow level where your elbows come back and really try and wrap those shoulder blades around your back. And the other key point here is, when you do this, we don't want your trunk to change position. So as you're coming back, we don't want your chest to poke out. We want to maintain a stable platform here. Your rib cage is essentially staying down so that your shoulders can wrap around that comfortably. So there's a little bit of skill involved in this. We don't want those shoulders to dip forwards. We don't want your chest to poke out. It doesn't get the desired result that we're after. But doing enough of those at a resistance that fatigues you is really important. So as we talk about a lot on the channel, the secret to a good, to knowing what your resistance looks like and what your workout looks like, is by valuing technique and fatigue. So if you know that you want to do about 8 to 12 reps, depending on what you've been advised on and what you want to do, if you fatigue before or after that number, then obviously the weight isn't appropriate. So if you fatigue too soon, then clearly the weight's too heavy. If it takes you a lot longer to fatigue, then clearly the weight's too light. But on the flip side of that, if you get to say 6 reps of 8 and you start to lose that good technique, then the weight is too heavy for you, or the resistance is too much. Similarly, if you can hold it together and you're not getting that fatigue, like I said, then the weight's too light. So if you know what good fatigue feels like and good technique looks like, then you'll always figure out that sweet spot of how heavy your resistance needs to be. So those 3 things are really, really important. So we need to make sure that you're freeing up the front and back, and then activating the muscles to allow you to be in that position a lot more. But the key difference with this is, we're also giving you some endurance and some strength to hold that position better. So the bonus 4th thing we sort of touched on at the start of this video is your attitudes towards your posture, your postural awareness. Now, if you're someone who sits at a desk all day, if you're someone who drives a car a lot, if you sit on the couch and watch TV a lot, if you sit up in bed and read a book, use your laptop, doesn't matter what it is, Even if you stand all day and sitting isn't for you, if you stand and slouch, then you're perpetuating, or most likely going to perpetuate, the reasons for those rounded shoulders. So if we want to have a conversation surrounding why you feel like your shoulders are rounding in the first place, your body is basically an obedient dog. It just does what you ask of it, knowingly or unknowingly. So if you're someone who is rounded through your shoulders, there's a very high likelihood that without you realizing it, you're getting into that position or have been getting into that position for a long time. Now, there is always clearly exceptions to that rule. There are people that are born with specific genetic things, whether it be a scoliosis or some other issue. I'm just talking about the majority of people and our attitudes and our awareness of our posture. If we were always aware of being in a good position, we would potentially always be in a good position. There'd be no reason for our tissues to suddenly start to round and get into a bad shape. So you owe it to yourself, if you're trying to fix rounded shoulders, to make sure that when you are in a stationary shape for a period of time, that you feel like you're comfortably keeping your shoulders back. Now, again, I've touched on this in a video before, but another common misconception, there seems to be a few in this video, but another thing that I see a lot is that your best position isn't back and down, it's back and up slightly. So not ridiculously up, but it's back. The reason for that is when we tend to lose good posture, we're dropping down and rolling forward based on gravity and the way that our anatomy flows when we let go. So if our bad postural habits lead to dropping and rolling forwards, theoretically undoing that is taking it back and up a little bit. So if we go back and down, potentially we're increasing the amount of tension in the area unnecessarily. So if you're sitting at a table, sitting at a desk, and you're trying to fix those rounded shoulders, make sure that you're pulling them comfortably back and maybe up a little bit. Make sure that you're not rounding forwards through your upper back. Make sure that your upper back is in a good position. It's not out, it's not all the way down. It has to be in a neutral position so those shoulders can be positioned accordingly. So to wrap that up, basically, by reducing some restrictions in the back and at the front, and by improving the strength and endurance of the muscles at the back, we can start the process of reversing the things that you've unknowingly accrued to develop rounded shoulders. However, all of those things will genuinely be for nothing if you can't take a step back and analyze and value good postural habits. Because the reason why things get tight at the back, the reason why things get tight at the front, the reason why things tend to weaken at the back when they should always be strong, tend to be because we're not using them and we're becoming dysfunctional from everyday shapes. So we need to have that adult conversation about your posture. You need to value that posture if you're going to make sure that these things go away for good. And I think that's the missing piece for a lot of people, is that you can do all the exercises in the world, but if you're not backing that up with good reinforcement of shapes and positions, then essentially you can be wasting your time. So with that being said, I hope that was helpful. Let me know in the comments if it was. Consider subscribing, leave a like on the video, potentially a super thanks if you think that this is valuable enough. But we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.